Hi, I'm Terry Niemeyer, and I am the Restoration Agricultural Education Specialist, it's a mouthful, here at Good Shepherd. I also direct and manage the farm. So my job includes working with the entire school to help integrate curriculum and the land from the youngest kids, our preschool kids, to the junior high, which we often refer to as adolescent, where I do the most work with. In fact, they're very engaged daily with the running of the farm and the business of the farm, which we refer to as the microeconomy. So this is our classroom, and I just wanted you to see that not all schools are going to be able to have a farm classroom, and it is used for other things sometimes. But I'm really lucky to be able to have a classroom of my own. And some of the standout features that I wanted to show you are somewhat organizational, but just to give you an idea of how all of this flows together in the cross-curriculum experiences. Well, first of all, you can see we have a collection of tools. We are located right by the door that goes outside. So having a set of tools here is really convenient, and being so close to the outside door keeps the dirt traffic from going through the school. So picking a location in your school can be super important for different reasons. But anyway, what we want to do when we have tool areas is to really clearly label them, and that's kind of our first work in each level, is really getting to know our tools with an appropriate name, a real name, so that we have the same reference when we're talking about a certain tool. Organization in general, though, is super important. We organize all of our supplies, and I'm just going to move around the room so you can get a feel for the other things. So a light garden could be your only garden. If you have no green space, a light garden can produce seedlings, which create a microeconomy project, microgreens, which are so popular now and quite profitable too, I might say. But also on these shelves where I don't need the light right now, you can see my tubs of organized seeds. We put them into the crop families, or the plant families, I should say. I guess as we continue to move around, there are some other tools that we're using, seed starting tools. We have what is actually a smart TV, but we use this for watching our own video clips that we make, educational in the fields, to share with each other, and also to sometimes look into how other people are doing things. A working calendar is so valuable when you're looking at a full season of work, and the kids learn this. They learn how to take a seed packet, and with the information that they're giving, being able to set up through the possibly 6-month time that this plant is going to grow, like succession planting, and not all seeds are planted multiple times, but to get a real sense of the life cycle and the work involved. And we do that on the off season so that on the on season, we really can focus on the work. And then we have those calendars, and then I transpose it up to this big calendar so that we can all see what's going on. And as I continue to move, I'm passing a fan, which is really important if you have a light garden in your room, to have air circulation. But part of farming, in real life farming, farmers are so many different things, small farmers. Fixing things is a real big part of our work. We cannot hire someone to fix everything. So having a workbench is just something you would see at any small farm. We are a little bit of a jack of multiple trades, for sure. And then a library. Every subject has books, and you can do a lot of self-teaching by reading them, and also gives us the ability to research in our class. Maybe there's a problem with the plant, maybe it's a disease you're not familiar with, insect pressure that you're just getting introduced to. But having the ability, and this comes from years of collecting books, this did not happen overnight, nor did this classroom. We started here with just a very simple number of raised beds, and I used to come to them, and then it evolved into bringing my whole farm here. So don't think that this happens overnight, but it's more about just getting started. Then I just wanted to give you a little heads up on how maybe a morning would work, just a real general look. Every morning I have information on the board that relates to our day. And it always starts with a look at the weather. And we use this, and they all have farm journals that they take notes, specifically their observation of the day and the weather forecast of the day. As we start to become thinking more like scientists, we get better and more detailed observations, but we can also do things like graph and create charts and look at the data, collecting the data and making some hypothesis, and just looking from year to year how things go. Because we're together for 2 years, it's kind of nice to take their information for 2 whole years and set that into some digestible grafting and starting to think like a scientist. Farmers are scientists. They're not just construction workers, they're scientists too. And then every day we review from the last time we were together, just to keep things fresh and to move on from one thing to the next. Everything segues into the next thing. So reviewing is a big part, and then of course introducing things for the day. So this part of our day, when they enter, they have outside shoes that are around the corner, and they have sometimes they'll keep rain gear in their on their hook so that they're prepared. So when they come, they suit up for whatever the weather is. They head outside, they do their observation, and they note what's happening today. That takes them probably 10 to 15 minutes before they're sitting down ready to get started. And as they come back, they're all working on their review question. And then we begin each class together with, usually we try to keep it at 20 minutes discussion time, and then we're moving into something else hands-on, whether it's seed starting or maintenancing our seedlings. Animal chores are physical work every day. And so having class every day is important just to keep that maintained. And then eventually we're moving into the gardens. We spend at least an hour, sometimes 3. Our full class is 3. If we get way behind and we just need to be outside working the whole time, we'll just take the whole time and work outside in the land. But almost always they get an hour to an hour and a half minimum of hands in the dirt work. Of course, when we're in the winter, we're working on more abstract things. They do a research project every year. They work with Mrs. Garvey on a literature, on reading a book and talking about it that's farm related and otherwise related to their curriculum. So, and that's also my downtime as a farmer. I take the month of January off. It's kind of my summer break, but it's a winter break. And that's the way we can keep the farm going when I'm not here, is to read a book together that's directly related to farming and to their other curriculum. So let's move outside and look at our outside lesson, our planting lesson for the Three Sisters Garden. And then we're going to hook up with Laura and Andrew, who are the team teachers of 7th and 8th grade here, and how they take that lesson then and incorporate it yet in other ways across their curriculum. We're going to take a look at just how our junior high integrates our farm work into the classroom, and we're specifically today going to look at the Three Sisters Garden. I think the Three Sisters Garden is an ageless lesson. I think everybody can use this lesson, and I think every class in the same school can benefit from just the amount of cross-curriculum that this can provide. But I'm going to show you what my lesson would be about. I'm not going to do the whole lesson verbatim, but just talk about how my lesson would be presented to my junior high students. And then our junior high teachers are going to take that into the classroom and show you how that would be integrated into their everyday lessons as well. So first of all, this is just a really nice size Three Sisters garden area. And you'll see that there are mounds here that are really in different stages of growing. So really by now we would have a much more mature garden, but just for this opportunity to share with you, we have it in different stages. So first of all, there's the lesson of making compost. Corn is a nitrogen lover, and compost creates lots of nitrogen through the decomposing of food scraps. And so using our compost, which we've talked a lot about in other presentations, is just part of creating that cycle that they see continuously on the farm of fertility, closed systems, sustainable circular systems. And we don't even have to talk about that. It's intrinsic to the lessons as we do these things daily. We put our food scraps in the compost daily, we use it when we're planting, and we see that cycle. We don't even have to mention it. So anyway, it starts with making mounds of great fertility like compost. So I'm just going to dump this. By the way, buckets are great, and this is a repurposed bucket from frosting at a local bakery. So if you're looking for great buckets, there's a lot of different resources out there. So we'll start with what we call mounds. And the first thing that gets planted is the corn. We need to get a little height on the corn in order to then add the next two stages. But the mound is going to be our super fertile spot. And the Native Americans that first brought this practice of companion planting they were our first farmers, right? You know, they might not have been scientists in the typical sense of science, but they were great observers, and they learned that, you know, the fish in the mound decomposed, and it created great fertility, and it brought them more maize. So anyway, within this lesson, there are going to be, even in the farm, so many other lessons, like the corn that we saved from last year to bring the seed to the new mound and to see that cycle of plants. So, you know, you might be harvesting you might have already harvested it, but we start with 5 or so. You could have even germination tested the seed first to see what percentage work, so that you could plant as many as you needed to get 5 that came up. So I plant extra and then pull out to get 3 to 5, and they just get pushed down. So the maintenance of the garden, of course, is something that they've learned, and they just continue. We have weeds that need to be pulled out. So with this size of a garden, we can keep a good amount of kids working on different things at a time. So once the corn's planted, we wait until we get it about 5 or 6 inches tall, and then we add the next seed, which is the bean. The bean is the legume. It's a nitrogen fixer, which means it draws down atmospheric nitrogen through its work in the soil and its particular bacterial nodules. It can cycle nitrogen to feed the plants and also to feed the plants around it. So this bean not only provides the food, but it provides the additional fertility to the corn and to the squash that'll be planted last. Around the corn, we should put the seeds close enough that they'll be able to climb the corn plant as it gets taller. The last seed that's added to the mound, which is on the side, would be the squash. And the squash is a bigger plant, so you won't keep as many, but you could start with extras so that you can thin them out. The squash we have growing over here is an example. So the squash then is the last plant that works as the ground cover to hold the moisture in and to keep the weeds suppressed so that the management is less. And the three work so well together scientifically as well as practically, and we call that companion planting. They have symbiotic relationships that allow them to do better because of their proximity to each other. So there are so many different lessons from that alone, not to mention the additional lessons that come from the history of this oldest companion planting practice that we know of, to the math that will be involved with the harvesting and the microeconomy of the products that are made, to the art that can be done with certain kinds of squash plants. We often grow birdhouse gourds because they give us the ability to be creative with the end product, and also to be responsible as far as providing some homes for our birds, because we know that birds give us an idea of how healthy our environment is. We call them environmental indicators. We want to bring in as many different kinds of birds as we can so that they can give us natural pest management, as well as some fertility and songs and colors and fun as well. So there is so much that every class could have their own mound, if nothing else, and could study a different part of this and include it in so many different subjects that they're learning about.
My name's Andrew Garvey. I'm one of the teachers at Good Shepherd Montessori School, and I get to work with Terry in working with the adolescents here at Good Shepherd. So in thinking about, Terry presented the three sisters, and so I want to just touch briefly on how that might be incorporated into our humanities study. Our study of humanities is based in Montessori philosophy, but it is more about storytelling. This idea that we as humans have the ability to tell stories, share stories, and relay our histories, allow us as a civilization to grow and to adapt. So these ideas of story are important because they're able to place us in this river of space and time. And when we think about history being that, this ability to stand inside of this river of space and time, and if a student can place themselves inside of that, these stories become meaningful. And our study of local history, so in thinking about the three sisters, we connect it with our study of local history. In thinking about local history, we start with this question about what brought you here? Why are we all here right now? And it's important to think about that wherever you're teaching, is to think about how you're connected to this place. And we have a very special place here in that the St. Joseph River carved out this river valley that we are a part of. And this, when we think about our local history, we start with that. And we start with that river, and we think about that river brought animals, and it brought humans here. And it brought this idea of stories to us at this point. Now, in thinking about our local history, we obviously start with the river, but then we quickly transition to the indigenous people that came here before us. And specifically, we deal a lot with the Pokagon band of the Potawatomi. And the Potawatomi have been in this part of the continent for over 500 years, but prior to that, there are Hopewell mounds that exist here in Dowagiac, so inside of this watershed, that have been here since the first century AD. And so we're dealing with practices and indigenous people that have been in this part of the world for over 2,000 years. And when the Potawatomi came here, they came from the East St. Lawrence Seaway, and they traveled across generations to get here. And when they arrived, they were a river people. But they quickly learned from the people that were already here who had horticultural practices. And when we're thinking about these horticultural practices, and these students are now practicing horticulture here and permaculture here on our property, they are able to see that this practice of farming this land, it connects them with a much older story. So when we read, so they'll read certain, they'll experience local history in a lot of different ways. They're reading primary sources, they're studying local history at our local St. Joseph County Public Library. We're visiting places along the river. We're exploring different historical sites. But when they read from these texts, and they read that about the Potawatomi, that once settled in their new environment with its warmer climate, the Potawatomi soon learned from their new neighbors the skills of growing crops, enabling them to improve the quality of their subsistence economy. Now, in any regard, they quickly became what anthropologists call a horticultural society. Like other societies in Michigan and Indiana, they grew corn, beans, and squash, crop anthropologists call the Mexican Trinity, after the place where they were first cultivated. That is something that they read, but what they're able to see is that they're participating in a practice that has been around for 2,000 years. And this process of planting these three crops together in this companion planting puts them in connection with something that's much larger than themselves, but it's something that they're able to connect with so that this story becomes real for them. So this lesson of the Three Sisters Garden, as Terry was pointing out, can be a very small footprint, and so you don't need a massive farm to be able to do something like this. And in the same way, in thinking about how you might connect your own history lessons, it's important to connect with the space. And so I try to give as many presentations as possible outside or on the watershed, at the river. And so when we're here on campus, we have the benefit of being on this slope right here, which is the old banks of the St. Joseph River. So when the Wisconsin Ice Age ended and the ice sheets retreated north, they left this river valley. And this hill that we're on is the old shore of the St. Joseph River. And so it's important that these children are able to sit here in this place and to be sitting on the old banks of the St. Joseph River to see that they are part of this story. And that makes this work meaningful.
Hi, my name is Laura Garvey, and I'm one of the junior high teachers here at Good Shepherd Montessori School, and I have the pleasure of working with Terry Niemeyer, who does our farm component here as part of the curriculum. And she presented about the Three Sisters Garden today, which is a perfect example for us to look at how just one of the plantings, one of the things that she does on the farm, can be so easily integrated into all of our studies. Andrew talked about how it integrates into our history lessons. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we then get to also make it part of our literature studies, our language work, and also our science work. I teach the science in the classroom, but I always joke that I really don't even need to, because they are really doing so much of their science on the land. Everything that you would learn in a traditional science textbook, a traditional science setting, can be applied and made so much more real through their work on the farm. So, but one of the, we were very excited just a year ago when one of our already favorite books came out with a young adult version. But if you don't already know Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, I can't recommend it enough for so many different ages that you teach. But I read this a few years ago when it came out and loved it, and was very excited to use parts of it with my students in the classroom. But my students are 12 to 14 years old, and we have a range of reading levels at that age, a range of ability and interest, especially in nonfiction books. I loved it because I'm a scientist. For some of them, it might not hook them in as easily, but Kimmerer does a beautiful job of weaving together her own indigenous heritage with her studies as a botanist and as a university professor. And so she does for me, making my work even easier. Terry does it once and Kimmerer does it again, showing how easily this is all connected. And once you see the connections in the studies, it's actually hard to not connect them and to not see how everything is related. So this is a great book. We used parts of it in the classroom, but a year ago they came out with the young adult version, which now is actually the one I recommend to anyone of any age, even the older adults, because I think she's done a beautiful job working with the people that she worked with here to adapt it, to really boil it down even more so to its essence, to make it approachable. There's beautiful illustrations, there's thoughts to contemplate. So I'm able to use this in our literature studies in the winter months when they're not as busy on the farm, and when we're coming inside to think about, to still contemplate farming, contemplate how our science and our lives are interdependent with everything we're doing on the land, and to read a book together. So the whole class reads it together. They have weekly assignments, a certain chunk of pages that they read each week, and then we gather for book group discussions. So they are not only engaging with the book in terms of reading it, but then the expectation is that they're coming ready to discuss that week's reading. They also have some form of a follow-up each week. So maybe they're writing a reflection on what they've just read. Maybe they are doing a drawing of the three sisters' garden, for example, if that was the part that they just read. And then at the very end, they're able to write longer essays or to do compare and contrast with different farming techniques, or to talk about how it integrates, what the integration that they saw across their studies. So you can read the whole book, just like with farming, right? We talk about how you can do a large-scale farm as part of your school program, or you can take just a small hunk. And so what I wanted to talk about today is the fact that you could read the whole book, or you could take just a small hunk of it. She has one chapter, believe it or not, dedicated to the three sisters. And right away opens up with beautiful illustration, beautiful storytelling, like Andrew talked about with our history lessons, where she is bringing this to life in a whole new and different way that we're able to then engage with as part of our literature studies. And she starts by talking, she says, for millennia, from Mexico to Michigan, women have mounded up the earth and laid these three seeds in the ground, all in the same square foot of soil. When the colonists on Massachusetts shore first saw indigenous gardens, they inferred that the savages didn't know how to farm. To their minds, a garden meant straight rows of single species, not a three-dimensional sprawl of abundance. And yet they ate their fill and asked for more. So much just in that paragraph, right? The history lesson that is there, the storytelling that can draw you in. And then she proceeds to go into a beautiful science lesson. In the course of just 10 pages, the chapter is only 10 pages long, where they're introduced to new vocabulary, new scientific terms. But more than that, they're also, just in this one section on the three sisters, and I won't ruin it all for you because you're going to go and read it now, of course, is how we each have our own important role. Whether you are the corn or the bean or the squash, you are doing something that you need to do for your own survival, but through those actions, you're also giving to those that you're living and working in companionship with. So they're able to take these scientific farming lessons and apply it even further to their own life. What does that mean for me? How do I do my best work so that those around me also thrive? And that's just been a really cool thing to hear them discuss each week and find their own meaning in. She has a fun part in the chapter where she talks about birth order, and lots of students identify with this because the corn, as Terry pointed out, corn has to be planted first. It's the first of the sisters, it's the eldest. It has to grow strong and tall and be supportive. And then the bean comes along, is a little more wild and free, and has to send out these sensors so that it can find the corn stalk and grow up the corn stalk, follow in the footsteps to a certain extent, but also be looking for its own way. But it doesn't just leach onto the corn, it has its own role of giving nitrogen to the soil and to feeding the other plants. And then the third sibling comes along, the squash, which roams free and kind of does as it pleases a little bit more, but with its huge leaves shades the ground and provides this beautiful space for the other plants to grow. I found a lot of our adolescent students really connect with that birth order story and identify with it if they have siblings themselves. So all of that, just from a book that really we chose for science and for farm, really ties into our literature studies in the classroom as well. And you can do one small part of it, or you can do a much larger part of it too. Because we have the benefit of having students for 2 years, 7th and 8th grade, we have 2 farm-related books that we do each year. In the 1 year, we do Braiding Sweetgrass. Again, for the young adults is the version that we really recommend. And then in the other year, we do Michael Pollan's The Omnivore's Dilemma. And there's also a young reader's version of that, which I highly recommend. And again, these are great in our winter months where we don't have as much time outside, we don't have as much work outside. It gives us the food for thought. So hopefully it seems obvious at this point how the Three Sisters Garden might tie into our scientific studies. It's full of botany lessons. And again, I can use this chapter as a science teacher. You don't have to just teach it in a literature class. The botany, she goes into each plant from its seed all the way through to fruition and talks about the different parts of the plant and why they are necessary and does it in her beautiful storytelling technique. Photosynthesis, how the corn grows up toward the sun, and then the bean winds around, and those leaves find their place within the corn leaves so as not to compete, but to take best advantage of the sun's rays. And then again with the squash spreading out wide. So we can talk about photosynthesis, and we can look at how these 3 very different leaf patterns all work together to maximize the energy that they can eat up from the sun. And then the nitrogen cycle. So I have just a couple slides that I would share with the students in the classroom. Here's just a reminder of that reading material if you want to use Kimmerer's book as part of your studies. Of course, there's any number of different diagrams that could use. But so again, imagine we are so fortunate to be able to literally grow the corn and the beans and the squash. We don't just have to look at a picture in a book, which would be how I'd be doing it if I didn't have the farm experience. So this is certainly a starting point and better than nothing at all, right? Still looking at the companionship here. But so what I'm doing here is providing them, again, there's a lot of repetition, or now it's me saying to them, tell me what you did with Miss Terry today. Why did the corn go in first? Or when will you be planting the bean seeds? And so I am able to reiterate and repeat what they've heard once. We find with many people, myself included, but especially the adolescents, that repetition is key. And hearing it in as many different ways as possible. So hearing it in this more didactic setting where they have a computer screen or a picture or a book in front of them is very different than being out in the garden, but they're getting it both ways instead of just the one. So again, we're able to look at a diagram of what they're experiencing in real life and talk about these different important roles that the different plants are playing. So I would be reiterating this, or actually probably asking them to reiterate to me what they learned in farm that day. And just lots of great images. I appreciated this one because their companionship goes, of course, as we know, below ground. And the root systems even work together to not compete. The corn tend to have the shallower roots and the beans go deeper. So they're taking advantage of those different levels of nutrient and water absorption in the soil, which can easily become part of our science lessons as well. This would be a great poster if it could be made into one. It literally walks through the steps that Terry talked us through outside, but a beautiful thing to have in the classroom as a reminder for the students to see not only the science, but the practical steps that one would move through. But then I can also integrate it right into, again, a very traditional study in science, which is our nutrient cycles, right? The nitrogen cycle. And this is where, once again, I think Robin Wall-Kimmerer does a beautiful job of storytelling the nitrogen cycle, because we can do it from this very scientific, well, there's atmospheric nitrogen, but plants can't absorb that, and it needs to be broken down by bacteria in the soil. Sometimes I see my students' eyes glaze over if I just try and tell it to them in that really factual way. In Kimmerer's book, she talks about the relationship. She truly brings these organisms to life and gives them the respect and kind of awe and wonder that I think brings the nitrogen cycle to life. So she talks about the nitrifying bacteria literally not being able to, they need a place that's oxygen free to change that nitrogen and make it available to the plants. And so they are in conversation with the plants, is how she puts it, a chemical conversation. And the plants will develop these nodules, like Terry talked about, on their root systems that allow for this change to take place. And everyone benefits. The bacteria benefit, the plant benefits, the other plants in the area benefit when that extra nitrogen is made available in the soil. So again, a very practical lesson that's part of every science curriculum, I would hope, but one that can really be brought to life through their work on the farm and through the reading of a book like Braiding Sweetgrass. I had just a couple different examples of, again, these images, these two-dimensional images, whether they're in a book or a PowerPoint that we use in the classroom to remind and support what they're learning on the farm, to help them see it or understand it, take notes on it in a different way.